After that night, nothing in his life felt familiar anymore. Terrell Johnson stood alone in the kitchen long after the house had gone quiet. The overhead light buzzed faintly, the kind of sound you only notice when everything else disappears. The smell of grilled meat still hung in the air, stubborn and wrong, as if the evening refused to admit it was over. Charred smoke clung to his clothes, his hands, his memory. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. The spatula lay in the sink, untouched. A half-empty bottle of barbecue sauce sat on the counter, its label smeared where his fingers had slipped earlier. Everything was exactly where it had been before. And yet, the room felt like a stranger's house. Behind him, through the sliding glass door, the backyard was frozen in time. The grill still stood open, blackened and cooling, a faint wisp of smoke curling into the night air. Paper plates were stacked unevenly on the patio table. A plastic cup had tipped over near the fence, its contents dried into a sticky ring on the concrete. The kind of mess you clean up together, laughing, arguing over who forgot to bring napkins. No one had cleaned anything. From the hallway came the soft creak of a floorboard. Terrell didn't turn. He already knew who it was. Lily stood there in her pajamas, small hands clenched at her sides. She looked at him, then past him, as if words might be hiding somewhere behind his shoulder. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She said nothing. She hadn't said much of anything since they got home. "Hey, baby," Terrell said gently. His voice sounded too loud in the quiet house. "You okay?" Lily shook her head once. Not no. Just not yes. Then she turned and padded back toward her room, leaving the hallway heavier than before. Terrell closed his eyes. At the dining table, Marcus sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, phone dark in his hand. He wasn't scrolling. He wasn't texting. He was staring at the floor like it had personally betrayed him. When Terrell finally looked over, Marcus looked up too fast, their eyes colliding. Fear flashed there first, then something sharper, something that hurt more. Marcus looked away. Sarah stood at the counter pretending to rinse a plate that was already clean. The water ran too long. Her shoulders were stiff, locked in place by sheer will. When she reached to turn off the faucet, her hand trembled. She noticed, tried to hide it by wiping her palms on a dish towel. "I'll finish up," Terrell said. Sarah nodded without looking at him. "Okay." Just one word, too careful. Like if she said more, something inside her would crack open and refuse to close. The clock on the microwave read 10:42 p.m. Terrell couldn't remember driving home. He couldn't remember unlocking the door. He remembered the sound, though. Metal on metal. A sharp click that didn't belong in their driveway. That sound followed him now, echoing behind his thoughts. A normal Saturday. That's what it had been. Burgers on the grill, music playing low. Marcus teasing Lily for stealing the biggest bun. Sarah laughing, reminding Terrell he always flipped the burgers too early. A normal night in a quiet neighborhood where people waved but didn't ask too many questions. Now Lily wouldn't speak. Marcus wouldn't look at him. Sarah couldn't stop shaking, and the house felt like it was holding its breath. Terrell rested both hands on the counter, gripping the edge until the cool surface pressed into his palms. He had stood in worse places than this. Louder places, places where fear made sense. But this was different. This was supposed to be safe. From the living room, the television flickered silently, a news anchor's mouth moving without sound. Terrell caught a glimpse of a patrol car on the screen, blue and red lights washing over a different street, a different family. For a split second, his chest tightened. He turned the TV off. Behind his eyes, questions, lined up, neat and relentless. What did they see when they looked at him? What did they decide in the first few seconds before he opened his mouth, before he raised his hands, before he said a single word? He replayed the end over and over, not the noise, not the shouting, but the looks, the way people stared, the way assumptions settled into place like facts, solid and unquestioned. In the silence of his kitchen, surrounded by the remains of a family dinner that never finished, Terrell Johnson understood one thing with terrifying clarity. Something had gone wrong long before anyone spoke, and whatever mistake had been made that night, it wasn't over yet. If you do everything right, the system will protect you. That belief had carried Terrell Johnson through most of his adult life. Weeks before the night, everything unraveled. His mornings followed a rhythm that felt earned, predictable, safe. He unlocked the side door of the Southridge Community Youth Center just before 8, the metal latch sticking the way it always did. Inside, the building smelled like disinfectant, old basketballs, and burnt coffee from the volunteer lounge. "Mr. T, you late today," one of the kids called out from the hallway. "Late is relative," Terrell replied, glancing at his watch. "On time is a choice." The kids laughed. They always did. He liked that they listened, even when they pretended not to. He showed them how to square their shoulders, how to keep their eyes up when they spoke, how to breathe before reacting, discipline without shouting, respect without fear. Anybody can lose control, he told them one afternoon as they struggled through a group exercise. Real strength is keeping it. After work, Terrell rarely went straight home. He stopped for groceries, picked up charcoal, waved to people who recognized him from the center. At least twice a week, he ended up under the hood of a neighbor's car. That Tuesday, it was Frank Miller from across the street. The man stood scratching his head while Terrell wiped his hands on a rag. "You didn't have to do this," Frank said. "Shop would have charged me." "They would have overcharged you," Terrell replied. "This way, you just owe me a soda." Frank laughed, the sound easy and genuine. "You're a good man, Terrell." Terrell nodded, accepting the compliment without feeding on it. He had learned a long time ago that being good was quieter than being praised. On weekends, the grill came out like clockwork. Saturday afternoons meant burgers, corn wrapped in foil, and music low enough for conversation. Sarah handled the sides. Marcus pretended he was too old to help, but hovered nearby anyway. Lily danced in circles on the grass, barefoot and unstoppable. Neighbors drifted in and out, drawn by the smell and the normalcy of it all. This was the life Terrell believed in. Order, routine, doing right by people, and expecting the same in return. One evening, while locking up the community center, his friend Calvin leaned against the doorframe watching him. "You ever get tired of being the calm one?" Calvin asked. Terrell shrugged. "Someone's got to be." Calvin shook his head slowly. "You still believe if you follow the rules, nothing bad happens." Terrell looked at him. "I believe rules exist for a reason." "That ain't what I said," Calvin replied. "I said doing right don't always get treated right." Terrell smiled, but something in his chest tightened. "I hear you. I just don't live scared." Calvin met his eyes, serious now. "It ain't about fear. It's about how fast people decide who you are." That night, Terrell lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept beside him. He had faced danger before. Real danger, the kind that announces itself loud and clear. What unsettled him now was quieter. He wasn't afraid of dying. That fear had burned out years ago. What lingered was the thought of being misunderstood in an instant, of being reduced to something he was not, of knowing the truth and still watching it slip away because someone else decided otherwise. He pushed the thought aside. Saturday came. The grill fired up. The sky turned orange over the rooftops. Laughter floated through the yard. Life behaved the way it was supposed to. Then, far down the street, blue and red lights flashed briefly between houses. Terrell glanced up, tongs in hand. "Probably nothing," he said, more to himself than anyone else. And for that brief moment, he believed it. That night, he crossed a line he never planned to. The grill popped softly as fat dripped onto the coals, sending up a brief flare of orange. Terrell adjusted the burgers with steady hands, the rhythm automatic. Music played low from a small speaker on the patio table. Old R&B, the kind Sarah liked because it didn't ask for attention. Marcus sat on the edge of the picnic bench, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to listen while Lily chased a moth near the fence. Sarah moved between the kitchen and the yard, calling out reminders about plates and drinks. It was ordinary in the best way. Terrell glanced down the street again. The sky was darker now, the neighborhood settling into evening. Porch lights flicked on one by one. Somewhere a dog barked and then stopped. The first patrol car didn't use its siren. It rolled slowly past the Johnson house, headlights sweeping across the lawn, lingering just a second too long. Terrell felt it before he thought it, a tightening behind the ribs. He kept flipping the burgers. "Daddy," Lily said, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. That car was staring. Terrell smiled. Cars don't stare. They just drive. The second car pulled in behind the first, then the third. Tires crunched against the driveway, too fast, too loud. Doors opened almost immediately. Not casual, not curious, purposeful. Sarah froze mid-step. Terrell set the spatula down slowly and wiped his hands on a towel. He turned before anyone said a word. 3 officers moved toward the yard, hands near their belts. One of them walked a little ahead of the others, scanning the scene like he had already decided what he was looking at. "Hands where we can see them," the lead officer said. Terrell raised both palms calmly. "Evening, officer. Is there a problem?" The officer did not answer him. The second one stepped forward and shoved Terrell hard in the chest. The world shifted half an inch. Terrell stumbled back, catching himself before he fell. The spatula hit the concrete with a sharp, metallic sound that cut through the music. Lily screamed. Terrell did not react the way his body wanted him to. He stood still. "Everybody stay calm," he said, his voice steady, almost too steady. "It's okay." The lead officer circled him slowly. A man in his 40s, confident, relaxed in a way that suggested practice. "Detective Morrison," he said, not offering a hand. "We got reports of suspicious activity here." Suspicious? Sarah stepped forward. "This is our home. We're having dinner." "Ma'am, step back," another officer snapped, blocking her with his arm. Terrell shifted his weight slightly, positioning himself without thinking, protecting angles, watching hands. "Officers," Terrell said, "I live here. My kids are right here. If there's a concern, we can clear it up." Morrison's eyes moved over him slowly. Clothes, build, skin, the grill. The neighbors beginning to peek from behind curtains. "Drug dealing," Morrison said casually. That's what the call said. "Drug dealing?" Sarah repeated, stunned. "That's insane." Terrell nodded once. "Officer, I've never been arrested in my life. I work at the community center down on Oak. You can check." Morrison smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Sure you do." Terrell felt the moment stretch. This was the point where he could push back. Demand names. Demand explanations. He didn't. He kept his hands up. "I'm happy to cooperate," he said. "Whatever you need." "ID," Morrison said. Terrell moved slowly, deliberately. He reached for his wallet. Before he could open it, Morrison snatched it from his hand, flipping it open, rifling through the contents. Driver's license, a card from Veterans Affairs. A thin chain slipped out, metal tags clinking softly against the driveway. Morrison picked them up, glanced once, then dropped them. "Cute," he said. "Anyone can buy these." The tags hit the concrete and spun to a stop near Terrell's foot. Terrell felt his jaw tighten. He said nothing. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, then again. Another officer grabbed it. "Washington, D.C., the officer said, smirking. "Probably your dealer." Terrell took a breath. Slow, controlled. "Sir," he said evenly, "you don't have a warrant." Morrison stepped closer, invading his space. "We've got probable cause, suspicious gathering, cash transactions." Sarah laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "We bought groceries this afternoon, with a debit card." Morrison didn't look at her. Terrell looked past Morrison, catching a glimpse of a neighbor holding up a phone. Recording. Others were coming out now. Curious. Quiet. This was the moment to raise his voice, to demand, to refuse. Instead, Terrell made a different choice. He stayed calm. He stayed respectful. He trusted that being reasonable would be enough. And Morrison watched him, already certain of what he saw. The mistake did not announce itself. It arrived quietly, wrapped in patience. Terrell stood exactly where Morrison wanted him. Hands visible, voice measured, shoulders relaxed just enough to signal cooperation. Every instinct he had ever learned told him this was the safest path. Do not escalate. Do not argue in front of your children. Do not give anyone a reason to misunderstand your intentions. "Sir," Morrison said, circling him again, "you got anything illegal on you? Weapons? Drugs?" "No, sir," Terrell replied. "Nothing." Morrison nodded as if he expected that answer. They all say that. Behind Morrison, Marcus took a step forward before catching himself. His fists were clenched tight at his sides, knuckles white. Terrell met his son's eyes and shook his head once, a silent command. "Stay back." Sarah noticed it too. The way Terrell seemed to manage the space without touching anyone. The way his calm did not come from fear, but from control. It should have meant something. Instead, Morrison saw something else. He saw a man who would not fight back. "We're going to take a look around," Morrison said. "Vehicle 2. You need a warrant for that," Terrell said calmly. Morrison smiled again. Probable cause covers it. He turned and walked toward Terrell's pickup truck like the decision had already been made somewhere else. Like the outcome was just waiting to be uncovered. Terrell felt the shift immediately, a tightening deep in his chest. The pattern was wrong. Too fast. Too confident. His daughter pressed against Sarah's leg, shaking. "Mommy, why are they mad at Daddy?" Sarah swallowed hard. "They're not, sweetheart. It's just a misunderstanding." Terrell wanted to believe that. Morrison reached the truck, dropped the tailgate with a loud clang that echoed through the yard. He leaned inside, pretending to examine tools that had been there for years. A flashlight beam moved deliberately, almost theatrically. Terrell watched every movement. This was the line, the one he had sworn never to cross, the moment where silence stopped being neutral. He considered speaking up, calling attention, demanding another officer, anything. He didn't. He stayed still. "Found something," Morrison called out. The words landed heavy. Morrison stepped back into view, holding a small plastic bag between two fingers. White powder, clearly visible. Too clean. "Well, look at that," Morrison said. "What do you know?" Sarah gasped. "That's not ours. That's impossible." Terrell spoke, his voice flat and controlled. "That does not belong to me." Morrison shrugged. "Funny how it was in your truck." Neighbors were closer now, phones raised, faces tightening with curiosity and judgment. "This is wrong," Sarah said, louder now. "You planted that." Morrison turned to her slowly. "Ma'am, step back before you make this worse." Terrell felt it then. The mistake, not the bag, not the accusation, the assumption. Morrison had decided who Terrell was the moment he stepped onto the lawn. Everything after that was just confirmation. "Turn around," Morrison said, pulling out handcuffs. "For what reason?" Terrell asked. "Possession, intent to distribute." "Intent to distribute," Sarah repeated, stunned. "To who?" "Our kids." Morrison did not answer. He grabbed Terrell's arm and twisted it behind his back. The metal cuffs snapped closed, tighter than necessary. Marcus moved instinctively. "Get your hands off my dad." Another officer blocked him. "Back up." Terrell closed his eyes for half a second. He had made his choice already. Calm, compliance, faith in process. Now he felt the weight of it. As Morrison began reciting rites in a bored monotone, Terrell looked past the flashing lights, past the phones, past the neighbors who would remember this version of him. A man in handcuffs, not the one who grilled burgers every weekend, not the one who fixed their cars, not the one who taught kids how to breathe before reacting. Just what they saw in those few seconds. The assumption had been made, and everything was already in motion. People started looking at him differently. The handcuffs closed with a sound that didn't belong in a quiet neighborhood. Sharp, final. Terrell felt the cold bite into his wrists as Morrison pulled his arms back, tighter than necessary. The metal pressed hard, deliberate, as if pain itself was part of the message. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice breaking in a way Terrell had never heard before. Terrell turned his head just enough to see his son's face. Fear was there, raw and exposed, but so was something else. Embarrassment, rage, the kind that burns without knowing where to go. "It's okay," Terrell said, forcing calm into his voice. "Stay with your mom." Lily was crying openly now, her small hands clutching Sarah's leg like she might disappear if she let go. "Why are they taking Daddy?" she sobbed. Sarah dropped to her knees beside her, arms wrapping tight. "They're making a mistake," she whispered, but her eyes betrayed her. She didn't know how to protect him from this. Phones were everywhere. Neighbors stood at the edges of their lawns, half hidden behind cars and hedges, recording in silence. Screens glowed. In the dark. No one asked what happened. No one asked if it made sense. The story had already decided itself. Morrison guided Terrell toward the patrol car, one hand firm on his arm, not rough enough to look violent, just enough to show control. "Watch your head," another officer said with a smile that didn't bother hiding its satisfaction. The back door slammed shut, sealing Terrell behind glass and steel. Through the window, he watched his family shrink into a frozen image. Sarah holding both children, Marcus standing stiff, fists clenched, Lily's face wet with tears. The patrol car pulled away. By the time Terrell was processed and released later that night, the damage had already spread. The first message came before he even slept. "You okay, man? I heard something wild went down at your place." Another followed. "Is it true you got arrested?" By morning, the tone changed. "My wife says they found drugs. Someone tagged the Johnson house in a video. Shaky footage, poor angles. His hands behind his back. Morrison's voice loud and confident. No context, no correction. Comments multiplied. Didn't expect that from him. Always thought something was off. You never really know people. At the community center, the director called him into her office the next afternoon. She didn't offer him a seat. "Terrell," she said carefully, "we need to think about the kids." He nodded. "I understand." "We're not saying anything happened," she continued, eyes fixed on a folder instead of his face. "But until this clears up, it's best if you step away." "Step away," he repeated, "just temporarily." The word hung there, thin and fragile. When he walked out, the kids were still in the gym. One of them waved when he saw Terrell. A counselor gently guided the child's hand back down. At the elementary school, Sarah noticed the shift almost immediately. Conversation stopped when she approached. Other parents smiled without warmth, eyes darting away too. Quickly. At pickup, one mother pulled her child closer. "Hey," Sarah said, trying to sound normal. "Everything okay?" The woman hesitated. "I just think, until things settle." Until things settle. At home, Marcus slammed his bedroom door harder than necessary. He didn't come down for dinner. When Terrell knocked later, Marcus spoke through the door. "Everyone at school knows." Terrell closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." "For what?" Marcus snapped. "For trusting them, or for letting them do this." Lily woke up screaming that night. Sarah rushed in to find her curled tight, shaking. "They took you again," Lily cried. "They didn't listen." Terrell stood in the doorway, helpless. He had faced enemies before. He had never faced this. By the end of the week, Terrell understood the truth. The handcuffs had come off, but the judgment hadn't. By the second week, silence became louder than accusation. Terrell noticed it first in the smallest places. The way the cashier at the grocery store avoided eye contact. The way a neighbor who used to wave every morning suddenly found something fascinating on his phone. Conversations didn't stop anymore when he walked by. They simply never started. At the gas station, a man recognized him. "Aren't you the guy from that video?" he asked, not unkindly, just curious. Terrell nodded once. "Yeah." The man hesitated. "Hope it works out." He didn't wait for an answer. At home, the house felt smaller. Sarah tried to keep routines intact. Laundry on Sundays, homework at the kitchen table, dinner at 6. But everything was slightly off, like a picture hanging crooked that no one wanted to fix. One afternoon, Sarah came home earlier than usual. She set her purse down slowly, sat at the table, and stared at her hands. "What happened?" Terrell asked. She took a breath. A parent asked if I felt safe. Terrell didn't respond. She said it politely. Sarah continued. Like she was doing me a favor. Asked if I had someone I could stay with. Just in case. Sarah laughed once, sharp and bitter. "As if I don't know the man I married." Terrell reached for her hand. She held on tightly, like she might slip away if she didn't. At school, Marcus stopped raising his hand in class. Teachers stopped calling on him anyway. One kid asked if his dad was going to jail. Another asked if their house was going to get raided again. Marcus shoved him into a locker and got detention. When Terrell went to pick him up, the vice principal spoke slowly, carefully. "We just want to make sure Marcus has the right support during this time." "During what time?" Terrell asked. The man cleared his throat. "You know." Lily's nightmares grew worse. Some nights she screamed. Other nights she just cried quietly, eyes wide open, staring at the door as if it might burst open again. She refused to sleep without the light on, refused to let Terrell leave the room. "Promise they won't take you," she whispered one night. Terrell swallowed. "I promise I'm not going anywhere." She studied his face like she was trying to memorize it. "Even if they think you're bad." That one hurt the most. Terrell realized then that something deeper had been taken from them. Not just peace, not just reputation, credibility. When he spoke now, people listened differently. They nodded, but they didn't absorb. They heard noise, not truth. His words no longer carried weight. At a neighborhood meeting, someone mentioned safety. Someone else mentioned police presence. No one looked at Terrell, but everyone angled their chairs slightly away. He sat through the entire meeting without speaking. He could have explained, could have defended himself, could have demanded fairness, but every explanation sounded like an excuse in his own head. That was the quiet cruelty of it. Once doubt entered the room, innocence became something you had to prove, and proof required permission. Late one night, Terrell stood alone in the backyard staring at the grill. He hadn't touched it since that night. The metal was cold now, the smell long gone. Only memory remained. Sarah stepped outside and joined him. "We didn't do anything wrong," she said softly. "I know. So, why does it feel like we're the ones being punished?" Terrell didn't answer right away. He looked out at the dark houses, the drawn curtains, the empty street. "Because," he said finally, "once people decide who you are, they stop listening." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. Inside the house, Lily slept uneasily. Marcus lay awake, angry at a world that had decided his father's guilt without asking a single question. And Terrell stood there, understanding something he had never truly accepted before. The first consequence was never prison. It was erasure. Every door he trusted began to close. The courtroom smelled like old paper and stale coffee. Terrell noticed it immediately, the way some people notice rain before it falls. He sat beside his attorney, hands folded, posture straight out of habit, while the prosecutor spoke in a calm, practiced voice that sounded nothing like accusation. "Possession with intent to distribute," the prosecutor said. "The evidence was recovered from the defendant's vehicle." Evidence. The word landed heavier than it should have. Terrell's lawyer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a voice worn thin by too many losing cases, leaned closer and lowered his tone. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said. "The evidence looks bad." Terrell didn't move. "Because it exists," he replied. "Because it was documented," the lawyer corrected. "Because it was logged, bagged, photographed. That matters more than how it got there." Terrell exhaled slowly through his nose. "So the truth doesn't matter." The lawyer hesitated. "Not the way you think." "It should." Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Not aggressively, just enough. Cameras didn't rush him. They watched him the way people watch a story that's already written. At home, envelopes piled up on the kitchen counter, legal fees, notices, bills that didn't pause just because life had fractured. Sarah spread them out one afternoon, organizing them by urgency, then by fear. "We can cover this month," she said quietly. After that, "I don't know." Terrell nodded. "I'll figure something out." "With what job?" Sarah asked, not accusing, just exhausted. He didn't answer. That night, Sarah sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, reading articles she never wanted to see. Comment sections full of strangers who spoke with certainty about a man they had never met. She shook her head. "I used to tell my students that the system isn't perfect, but it tries," she said. "I really believe that." Terrell looked at her. "Do you still?" She didn't respond right away. "I don't know," she said finally. "I don't know what it does when it decides you don't matter." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Marcus stopped asking questions and started making statements. "This wouldn't be happening if you had just said something," he snapped one evening. "I did say something," Terrell replied, keeping his voice level. "I cooperated." Marcus laughed, sharp and bitter. "Yeah. And look where that got us." Terrell stood there, unsure how to bridge the distance. He had taught his son to trust process, to believe effort mattered. Now Marcus was learning something else. Bills continued to arrive. Calls went unanswered. Doors closed without explanation. And in the quiet spaces between conversations, Terrell felt it clearly. He wasn't fighting an accusation anymore. He was fighting disbelief. The days began to blur together, each one shaped by the same unanswered questions. Terrell spent hours sitting in rooms where people talked about him as if he weren't there. Prosecutors, administrators, counselors, everyone spoke in careful language, polished and distant, always ending with the same conclusion: "We'll be in touch." They never were. At the community center, the board sent a formal letter, temporary suspension pending the outcome of legal proceedings. The wording was clean, almost kind. No accusation, no defense, just distance. Sarah read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. "They didn't even ask you," she said. "Not one question." Terrell nodded. "They don't need to." Money became a constant presence in the house, sitting between them at the table, following them into every room. They cut back where they could. Cable canceled. Groceries stretched. Marcus stopped asking for anything, even things he needed. One evening, Sarah sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. "I used to tell myself that if something ever Went wrong, she said. There would be someone you could talk to, someone who would listen. Terrell sat beside her. I thought that too. She turned toward him, eyes tired. What if there isn't? The question wasn't about the case. It was about everything. Marcus stopped coming home right after school. When Terrell finally found him at the park, sitting alone on the bleachers, the anger came out all at once. You always said if you do things right, things work out, Marcus said. So what does this mean? Terrell stayed quiet. Marcus stood up, voice rising. If you did everything right, why are we here? The words landed harder than any accusation in court. Terrell opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no answer that didn't sound like a lie. I didn't protect you, he said finally. Marcus shook his head, tears forming despite his effort. You trusted them. The distance between them felt wider than the park. That night, Terrell sat alone at the kitchen table long after everyone went to bed. The house creaked softly, settling around him. He stared at his hands, remembering how easily they had been ignored. He had done everything he believed in, stayed calm, followed instructions, trusted the process, and still, he was invisible. At his lowest point, Terrell understood the truth no one had taught him. The system didn't fail him by accident. It failed him because it never saw him clearly to begin with. Only later did he realize the truth wasn't about the drugs. The realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, disguised as routine. Officer Amanda Wilson sat alone at her desk long after her shift was supposed to end. The precinct had thinned out, the night crew settling into its usual rhythm. Phones rang, printers hummed, coffee burned on a hot plate no one bothered to replace. On her screen, Terrell Johnson's case file glowed back at her. She had read it 3 times already. Possession with intent. Evidence recovered from vehicle. Officer statements aligned. Timeline clean. Almost too clean. Amanda leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. She had learned, both in uniform and long before it, that clean stories often hid the messiest truths. She clicked through the body cam footage again. Morrison's voice was calm, confident, certain. Not once did it waver. Not once did it adjust. He never asked if Terrell owned the truck, never asked who else had access to it, never paused long enough for uncertainty to exist. He knew, or rather, he believed he knew. Amanda paused the footage on a frame where Morrison stood in the Johnson driveway, Terrell just out of focus behind him, hands raised, calm, composed. Most people in that position begged, argued, panicked. Terrell hadn't. That bothered her. She pulled up reports from Morrison's previous arrests. Similar charges, similar neighborhoods, similar suspects, different names, same pattern. Evidence discovered quickly. Confident declarations. No hesitation. Amanda's jaw tightened. It wasn't that Morrison had found drugs. It was that he had never considered the possibility of not finding them. The next morning, Amanda stopped by the evidence room under the pretense of routine paperwork. She logged the bag recovered from Terrell's truck. Photographed, sealed, perfectly labeled. Too perfect. She thought of her brother then, James. The way he used to stand when he talked to their parents. Calm, grounded. Like chaos had no permission to touch him unless he allowed it. James had worn that same stillness. That night, Amanda sat in her car outside the Johnson house. She didn't get out. She just watched. Lights on inside. A silhouette moved past the window. A family trying to stay upright under weight they didn't earn. She thought about Morrison again, about the way his eyes had swept over Terrell before a single word was exchanged. That was when it clicked. The case had never been about proof. Had been about confirmation. When Amanda finally requested an internal review, the room went quiet. You sure about this? Her supervisor asked. I'm sure about one thing, Amanda replied. We didn't investigate a crime. We validated an assumption. The review didn't move fast. Nothing ever did. But cracks began to show. Terrell learned about it days later, sitting across from his lawyer in a cramped office that smelled like paper and disappointment. There may be an issue with the arresting officer's conduct, the lawyer said cautiously. It's early. Terrell nodded. He didn't feel relief, just clarity. That night, he stood alone in the backyard, staring at the cold grill, the place where everything had started, or so he thought. He replayed the moment again. Not the handcuffs, not the accusation, the silence. His silence. He had believed restraint was strength. That dignity meant absorbing the blow and trusting the system to correct itself. Instead, his quiet had created space. Space for Morrison's certainty to grow unchecked. Space for an assumption to harden into fact. Terrell understood it then, fully and painfully. Morrison didn't need Terrell to be guilty. He needed him to be quiet. And Terrell had given him exactly that. The lesson settled heavy in his chest, not as regret, but as resolve. Silence, he realized, was not always noble. Sometimes it was permission. In the end, everyone paid a price. The investigation did not arrive with sirens or speeches. It came quietly, the way truth often does when it no longer asks for permission. An internal review turned into interviews. Interviews turned into subpoenas. Morrison stopped showing up at roll call. At first, people whispered. Then they stopped pretending not to know. Body cam footage was re-examined. Evidence logs were questioned. A pattern began to form, undeniable in its repetition. Stops that escalated too fast. Searches that produced results with suspicious consistency. Cases built on certainty rather than inquiry. When Morrison was placed on administrative leave, the neighborhood noticed before the Johnsons did. Someone left an envelope on their porch. Inside was a printed article, folded neatly. The headline circled in pen. Officer under review amid evidence handling allegations. Sarah read it twice before sitting down. They're finally looking, she said. Terrell nodded. He felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Weeks later, the charges were dropped. No press conference. No apology loud enough to match the damage. Just a brief statement from the district attorney, citing insufficient evidence and procedural concerns. Terrell Johnson was officially cleared. The word innocent appeared in print, but it felt thin, like a correction buried beneath a lie that had already traveled farther. At home, nothing snapped back into place. Marcus listened when Terrell explained what had happened, but his eyes stayed guarded. He had learned something. During those weeks, that could not be unlearned. You were right, Marcus said one night. Doing everything right doesn't mean anything if they already decided who you are. Terrell wanted to argue, to restore something. He couldn't. Lily stopped screaming in her sleep, but she still flinched at flashing lights. She asked questions now, hard ones. Why people were allowed to lie. Why no one said sorry. Why Daddy had to prove he was good. Sarah returned to work, but the warmth was gone. Parents smiled again cautiously, like neighbors after a fire. Trust had been singed. Morrison's fall was faster than his rise. He resigned before the department could fire him. Civil suits followed. Federal interest. The same certainty he once wore now cracked under scrutiny. In the courtroom, he looked smaller, not misunderstood, just exposed. When the verdicts came, no one cheered. Terrell watched from a distance, hands in his pockets, knowing that accountability did not undo harm. It only acknowledged it. On a quiet evening, the family sat together in the backyard. The grill was back out, but no one rushed. No music played. We didn't lose everything, Sarah said softly. Terrell looked at his children, at the spaces between them. No, he said, but we lost enough. Across town, Morrison faced the consequences he once handed out so casually. Across the same city, Terrell faced a different truth. Justice had come, but it had arrived late, and it had left scars on everyone it touched. The real mistake wasn't the arrest. It was the assumption. Terrell returned to the community center on a quiet Monday morning. No announcement, no apology waiting at the door, just the familiar rattle of keys, the same scuffed floors, the same smell of disinfectant and old gym mats. Some of the kids looked up when he walked in. A few smiled, a few hesitated, unsure if they were allowed to. Terrell noticed everything. He gathered them in the small classroom near the back, the one with chipped desks and crooked posters about teamwork and respect. He didn't start with what happened. He never did. Instead, he asked a question. What do you think courage looks like? Hands shot up. Not being scared. Standing your ground. Taking a hit and not crying. Terrell listened, nodding. Those are part of it, he said. But courage isn't just about what you can take. The room grew quieter. Sometimes courage is knowing when staying quiet helps, he continued. And sometimes it's knowing when silence hurts more than speaking. A few kids shifted in their seats. I used to think being calm was always the right answer, Terrell said. That if you did everything right, the truth would take care of itself. He met their eyes, one by one. But truth doesn't move on its own. People have to carry it. Later that afternoon, Sarah watched from the hallway as Terrell laughed with the kids, his voice steady. Again, she felt pride and something else, a sharper awareness. She no longer spoke about justice the way she used to, not as a guarantee, not as a promise. She understood now that systems weren't fragile, they were selective. That night, the family sat together at the dinner table. No phones, no news, just food and quiet conversation. Marcus listened more than he spoke. Lily asked questions without fear in her voice. It wasn't the same as before, but it was honest. As Terrell cleared the plates, he looked out the window toward the street. It looked ordinary again, peaceful. He knew better now. What happened to him wasn't an accident. It wasn't a glitch. It was a reflection. The system didn't break that night. It simply revealed who it had already decided to protect.